Welcome to Happeo Unmuted, the podcast where we speak openly about what it really takes to connect people at work. From internal comms and knowledge sharing to the messiness of change and the rise of AI, we go beyond best practices to unpack what's working, what's not, and what's worth rethinking. Our host, Bourgeault-Trickey, has spent over 10 years in internal comms, building and launching intranets for organizations in telecoms and finance. He now leads client services at Happeo, where he's helped over 120 businesses across the globe create and grow engaging digital workplaces that drive organizational goals and objectives. If you care about how people in your organization share, learn, and adapt, this is your show. And if you're looking for a modern digital HQ, you can find us at happeo.com.
Welcome to Happeo Unmuted, the podcast where we explore the messy, brilliant, and occasionally unfiltered world of internal comms, knowledge sharing, and digital transformation. I'm your host and Happeo's Principal of Client Services, Bourgeault-Trickey, and today we're talking with Jonathan Ralton. Jonathan brings more than 2 decades of experience in digital transformation, with a background spanning technical consulting, product management, business analysis, and change leadership. His career began in the early days of SharePoint managing a global intranet and has since evolved into helping organizations bridge real business problems with complex, feature-heavy technology stacks. Known for running toward challenges rather than away from them, Jonathan specializes in information architecture and taxonomy design, creating strong foundations for knowledge capture, discovery, and reuse. He's an active voice in the knowledge management community, recently speaking at KM World in Washington, DC, and appearing next at the Empower KM conference in Charleston. When he's not facilitating the SIKM Boston peer group or pursuing his MBA, you'll find him behind a camera as an architectural and landscape photographer. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to me go through the introduction like that. So I just wanted to ask actually a couple quick questions regarding that. As far as these conferences that you've been going to, what's it been like lately? I know that there's been a lot of change going on across things, and are you finding that there's sort of a real sort of speed to everything? And is that sort of coming across with the people who are there and the kind of feedback you're getting?
Yeah, this year AI is not new, and everyone's kind of gotten over the shock, like we must do something with this, or what the heck is it? Most people kind of understand what it is and maybe what it could do for them, and they seem kind of lost to me. There are a lot of vendors out there that say we can help. There's a lot of use cases that have been tried, and a lot of them have, not worked very well. There's a lot of, there's some good news, and there's a fight for talent to help folks find these answers and to realize the return on investment that a lot of these companies are putting so much money into the idea and the promise that there's going to be efficiency and a better world on the other side of this. And we're still in the middle of figuring it out amongst a continuously rapid cycles of change and improvement and augmentation of capability. So I think there's still, we're somewhere on the hype curve, and I hope that we're about to crest over the roller coaster and maybe, start pushing aside some of the things that don't make sense, but really grabbing onto the things that we figured out, like, hey, yes, this is a great way to employ this or exploit it or, get some value out of it. And we align that with our people, because we should always involve our people with our tech, and make sure that our processes are up to date and help take advantage of that AI, and then fuel what decisions you make to continue to improve with AI. So I'm always a big proponent of people, process, and tools. AI is just another tool. It's a lot more exciting right now, but alongside figuring out what you're going to do with your people and how that aligns with your processes, I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, that curve piece you mentioned is interesting, because it's almost like we're on this crazy roller coaster that just keeps going up, and then you're thinking it's going to go over the edge, and then they introduce a new model, and suddenly we're in this other little curve.
While you're on it, yes.
Yeah. What I wanted to start off there with was sort of along the lines of, like, when people think about your role, what's the biggest thing that they tend to misunderstand?
Yeah, I play a lot of different roles over the years in different projects and, internally on different teams, or, depending on the needs of clients. I have a particularly high bar for things that, if it's a system, if it's a application, if it's a deliverable, a document, even notes about like a crazy whiteboarding session, I think that they should look crisp, professional, and look good. And that high bar has earned me the status of the person that you take something to and you want it to look good. Make it look pretty is, what people will tell me. That was a thing that customers often asked, or internal users as well, with SharePoint back in the day. Can you make it look less SharePointy?
Yeah.
And often the answer was no, but also that wasn't really the point. And when folks would come to me, and they still do, and ask me to, craft their message a little bit better, tweak their wording, or, hey, this is what I'm trying to say. They may think that it comes out and it just looks better, but what I'm actually trying to do with them, and what I care about the most, is trying to figure out what is their message, what is the content, what are they trying to say, and making that come across better. And that's what's most important. I think I have, my blog is titled "Content Precedes Design." Mm-hmm. And at the time I was managing a UX team. It's not one of my particular strong points, but I understand it, and it's important to me in terms of the user experience. But I would always try to remind everyone that you don't start with what it looks like. What it looks like supports the information and the content that you're trying to deliver, and what the user is trying to get. And it can't come in the way of that and interrupt that experience. So whether it's, editing something that someone needs to message, it's a web page, or, an application, or that kind of thing, and what it looks like, it all should, in my opinion, support what that content is, and what you're trying to say with it, and what you want people to get out of it, the outcome of that.
Yeah, it's an interesting crossover, this make it look pretty requests that people are getting, like that. It's kind of reassuring to know that it's coming across at the knowledge management side as much as it is on the internal comm side. Because I wanted to ask a little bit more around like what knowledge management means to you. So I've been very interested to see like the different responses I'm getting from the various guests I've had. So I was wondering like how you explain that to leadership or someone outside the field today, from your point of view.
Yeah, a classic consultant answer is it depends, of course, on your organization or your context, or what have you. But I mean, I think knowledge management is so important, and even just saying those words, it makes it sound a bit academic, I think, these days. Or depending on what you're familiar with, like from the big consulting firms from 20, 30 years ago, where the term kind of came into fruition. It's different these days, but it's still the same. And I think it's so important. I mean, I think it's really about the intrinsic value of what your organization does, the know-how, your IP. If you have a secret sauce, like it's the recipe for that. But what it also is a representation and a culmination of all the time and money over, whether it's weeks or months or years or decades, that was put into reaching that point, to have that knowledge, to have that value. I mean, often when you get a valuation of a company, or they're about to be acquired, or merged in, or that kind of thing, like part of the value of the company is what their IP is, or what they're good at. And the reason that they're good at something is because they've cultivated knowledge around it and expertise. And that is not something that's on an inventory sheet or in a warehouse. And part of keeping that alive is extracting it out of the humans that were, creating that knowledge, and making it valuable to other humans who have different brains and are going to be in different contexts, and making it potentially relevant for them. You have to, capture that knowledge, curate it, put it into potentially different contexts, make it discoverable, and then help people apply it to their situation, and then find out what they did with it, and then have a feedback loop where you can do that all over again. So that to me is what knowledge management is. It's not a thing. It's a set of values, and it's an ongoing flow of the value that is within your organization, and that it comes from your people, and it's supported by tools and process.
All right, it's great. You kind of answered my next question, which is like around the idea of what does good look like. Do you have kind of standards around like measurement or anything like that you use to sort of anchor these things from a leadership standpoint? They tend to love having their dashboards and high level overviews of?
Yes, they do love their dashboards. KM is, I think, a lot more difficult to measure, and I don't want to go to like technical or rubric because I'm not someone that goes in and does this evaluation. It's sort of my own personal opinions, I guess, about what would make a good knowledge management program or ethos in an organization. And I think one of my telltale signs is that, or what I try to do in an organization that I'm trying to evolve KM within, is to get people to understand that KM is not just a team or a department over there that does KM over there. Like you feed them things and stuff comes out of it. Good KM is infused throughout the organization. It's baked into processes. It's taught and expected when you onboard folks and when they exit. I mean, part of knowledge management and good knowledge management is learning from those who are leaving about if there's anything you need to know about why, or what could be better, or what worked well, or that kind of thing, and not just letting that die. And so doing some kind of exit interviewing through that as well. And that includes your customers. When you're done with a project, they're exiting and you want to know that information from them as well. And I think the organizations that do KM well don't just stop at gathering all the knowledge. I mean, that's one of the things that's kind of the easiest and, kind of bread and butter. You want to, suck up all this stuff and put it somewhere. That's not what KM is. That's just content management. You want to use that information to keep improving. You have all that to leverage. And I think KMers can encounter that information if they understand the context in which it was acquired and where it might need to be used later, and figure out if you want to improve based on this knowledge, like be change agents. What would you want to do with this information and how would you want it to go next time? Would you want to repeat something that worked really well? You need to standardize that. Would you want to avoid a mistake or a problem that occurred? You want to figure out how to avoid that. What are the signs that someone would need to know ahead of time to be proactive, not even hit that problem or create it? Or if that problem does occur, what were the ways that we got out of that problem and did it so that we solved it? So that's what I expect to happen with the knowledge. It should be used to make things better, delight your customers, stop making those mistakes, find hidden revenue, boost your CSAT, reduce your attrition, outcompete that, other company over there that's doing other stuff. You want to do something with knowledge, and that's, I think, good knowledge management. And so again, that happens not just with one team over here and, that you feed them stuff and it comes back out. That's not how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I like how you kind of brought up the clarity of, okay, there's content management and that's a part of knowledge management. We don't normally kind of get into that depth, but that's a great way of describing it, at least for like a high level overview of starting to think about it differently. Maybe if you're already maybe doing content management, but you're not necessarily thinking about it in the broader scope. So, and I also like the idea there around like the proactive versus reactive approach to sort of thinking about what you're getting out of your knowledge, or like how you're going to sort of act on what you're getting as far as insights from that knowledge that you have. So I guess like the piece that I'm thinking about here is like from a like a learning standpoint. I'm wondering maybe if you could describe something around like the hardest things about knowledge management that no one's talking about right now, or what you're trying to solve for in that regard.
Yes, and I speak to this from experience. I have tried to grow and, sometimes been successful and sometimes not, grow knowledge management programs or even just small efforts and initiatives. And usually when you start off, it's just you had an idea and, okay, you can go ahead and do this. Or maybe you get like one other person or, a small team to work with. But the folks that have the knowledge and need it are out there. They're doing the stuff, whatever your company does. Say, you're working on, projects with customers and professional services. That's one of my most common situations.
Yeah.
Getting those people to spend the extra, because it's extra to them, time that isn't baked into their job responsibilities, even though it should be, is incredibly difficult. You try to make an argument that, well, you kind of pay it forward. If you spend this time, then, someone else might benefit from what you're contributing. And if someone else spends some time, you might benefit from what they're contributing. This might look good on your next performance review, but it's really not close to what they're actually being measured on. And they're not going to get incented for it, especially in a situation where they're billable or there's chargebacks or that kind of thing, usually folks are encouraged to, bill as many hours and don't spend, any time on non-billable activities. And one of the first questions that I would always get from folks in these kind of situations was, can I get credit for this time?
When
I'm working with you. And I had to tell them no, like, but it's good. Like, you should be doing this. And like, it's, we're part of a team, and like, this is great. Like, this doesn't work. And I don't think, one of the answers is to, just give people credit for the time. But it's not the whole story, because there's something missing there in the culture about continuous improvement and developing a learning organization that benefits the company, that benefits your team that you're on, and also benefits you as a professional. And HR and training is involved in there too. Like, everyone, I think, should be having, this is kind of goes back to the point about, KM needs to be ubiquitous throughout the organization and baked into the way the organization works. There needs to be a value associated with putting in that time, so that no one says it's extra. It's part of what you do. And in theory, if you are a professional services org that is billing out for your time, part of what you're billing out for is your expertise. You're charging maybe a higher rate. You go to an auto mechanic, like, if this auto mechanic has never fixed a car before, they're probably gonna, not be able to charge you very much, because they don't know what they're doing yet. But if you go to an auto mechanic that really knows what they're doing, they're probably charging you more money, because they know what they're building in the expertise into what they're charging you. And if you as a professional, or you as an organization, are not building in these practices to how you work and how you engage with what you're delivering to your customers, you're doing your organization, your shareholders, if you're public, and your customers a disservice. So that's one of the hardest things, is that, this usually is viewed as something extra. And, what do I get out of it? This is some of the stuff incidentally that I'll be trying to elicit discussion around in my session at EmpowerCAM in February. It's under the topic of the accidental knowledge manager, because usually if you're passionate about this kind of thing, or you see a need, you start off by yourself, and then you're trying to, beg, borrow, and steal people's time and get them interested when they're incented to not spend that time with you.
So if we go a little bit further, the next kind of piece that we didn't necessarily touch on is sort of like the tech stack side of things. So with all of this, we talked more like the hearts and minds, it sounds like, quite a bit. But I'm wondering, like, from the technology side of it, like, what has that been looking like for you as far as like successful knowledge management in a world of the ever changing tech stack of these days?
Yeah, and I think I'd kind of flip that question around. I mean, I think that knowledge management would help, healthy knowledge management would help you get through things like the chaos and the noise and those ever-changing tech stacks. Yes, your knowledge resides, these days, of course, and is mostly trapped inside technology or a tool or that kind of thing, and it has to in order to be efficient. I get that. But I think there's some of that value to the organization, and that ethos that if everyone adopts that, helps you weather storms and cut through hype to what is tried and true. What does your organization do well? And how do we navigate this chaos? Or, how do we determine what is noise and what isn't? And sometimes noise is an opportunity. And if you have that, learning organization mindset, what may seem like noise initially, or in an other kind of organization doesn't think that way, if you bring your knowledge to bear and encounter that, it might actually be an opportunity, and you can take advantage of it, relatively easly or quicker than a competitor. That might help you get through those kinds of things, and take advantage of them and take control of that chaos, rather than being a victim of it.
I guess another angle for consideration is this idea. You kind of brought it up before with the idea of the accidental knowledge manager. I kind of like that statement, and it ties into that idea of like dealing with this ever-changing tech stack. Suddenly you're thrust into it. But I guess the other side of this is from a content management standpoint, as you rightly pointed out, like there's content management as a piece of knowledge management. And so when you're coming into that role, maybe you're either choosing to take it on, or you're being kind of given that opportunity. How are you, in your experience, like how have you typically approached that idea of managing legacy content? So like having all of this existing stuff that you now have to kind of manage or wade through, versus that net new content creation or net new content strategy. when you take over that knowledge strategy overall?
Yeah, that is the burden of technology that's ever changing. I mean, I think on my desk right now, I was doing some stuff with a DVD, and I had to drag out a DVD player. Like, there's stuff stuck on this thing. It's a piece of media, that kind of thing. But that happens, of course, with our systems as well. I mean, how many legacy, enterprise content management systems don't exist anymore these days, or are still running like that shouldn't be running on some kind of, Win2K server, under someone's desk, like because they can't bear to shut it down or that kind of thing. Yeah. Migrations have been with us forever, so people should be familiar with those. I think it's part and parcel. I mean, I wish it wasn't the case. Cloud and SaaS and that kind of thing, like, usually a vendor's taking care of that for you these days, hopefully. But then again, if you ever want to, change a vendor or change a tech stack, move from, AWS to Azure or, something like that, your content is trapped in that ecosystem and you need to get it out. And it's a lot harder than it was if it was sitting, in your server room out back, and you can actually get to the data and, it's in SQL and you can move it over or something. I also, see it's not really an opportunity, but even if this wasn't the case and you weren't having to consider how technology evolves and how you would, how content becomes legacy and might be in a legacy tool, knowledge, in my opinion, shouldn't stay stagnant anyway. So legacy content shouldn't stay at rest for too long, or at the very least, the context in which you want folks to discover that knowledge that does remain the same, and apply that knowledge today versus 5 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever should continue to evolve. And that in order to do that work, you need to take a look at that knowledge, and maybe it moves from over here to over there, or maybe it gets updated, or maybe this is not something that the company does anymore because we divested this division a long time ago, and also we should have sent those files with that company, and we want to destroy them, that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, legacy content is, I won't say it's an opportunity, like I was saying earlier about chaos, but I don't think that knowledge should stay at rest too long, or at least the context in which you wrap that knowledge around for how would you use it now. And because that's the only reason you should keep it around, is if it's going to be potentially valuable. That does need to continue. That can never become legacy. So it's kind of part of I think the ecosystem and keeping knowledge flowing it's not just like keeping the knowledge that you captured up to date, but the wrapper that you put around that about, hey, how would this apply today to work that we're doing now, people that we have now and processes that are current, that needs to never become legacy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess another kind of question I'd ask, I've seen a lot of trend lately around the idea of consolidation of content and trying to think about, like, is there an all-in-one tool that you can put everything into in order to kind of enable the AI strategies or the knowledge strategies of the future?
Yes.
I'm wondering, like, what you might think about that, or like, what's your kind of point of view on that, as far as like whether it should be more decentralized and having different platforms is like a best fit approach for different kinds of content or different kinds of knowledge, or would you prefer to have that consolidated approach? Like, I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts on that.
Again, it depends. I think based on the team, the people that I would have available, and the processes that this knowledge needs to support, I see arguments for both. Especially if you have a lean organization, a smaller budget, less appetite to kind of dive into this stuff. I think there's a term that I've encountered recently, that instead of going for best of breed tools, you go for best of suite. You kind of make a decision that you invest in, kind of a larger platform, a larger ecosystem. And instead of picking this tool over here that is the best thing for this particular situation, and this tool over here that's the best thing for this other situation, and suddenly you have a constellation of many things that need integration and working together and that kind of thing, you kind of hesitate to say settle for something else, but the value proposition is investing in a suite of tools that already work together, that someone else, some kind of vendor, some technology company cares and manages how they all interact and interoperate. so that you don't have to think about it that, so you can focus on your content and your knowledge. That's a big advantage, especially in, lean situations. That also means, though, that if ever someday you want to, change horses, it's a lot harder. The converse of that is if you have the ability and with headcount and budget and that kind of thing, and you really want to, enable your teams to the max, like, why not go out and pick, the best thing that works for that team? If you can support it, then, by all means. And I think that's, important to give folks and invest the money in those kinds of things. If you get that return, like if you're going to give something to sales that, sales really wants and it works really well for them, like if they're going to triple their numbers, next year, maybe because they're able to use this thing, like, why wouldn't you make that decision? It's kind of a no-brainer.
Sure.
But you should only do that if you have the people and the processes that support that.
Yeah, that was a very diplomatic answer. Well, let's switch back to the knowledge management side of things and kind of consider the same thing. So I wanted to maybe talk a bit about the challenges and impact of knowledge management from your perspective. So I wanted to see if you had maybe a time or an example where this strategy that you were able to implement made a real difference for the business, or like maybe a small change that you made that had a surprisingly big impact on knowledge management.
Yeah, this was a great question, I think, because something like this can help demonstrate and kind of help convince, like, yes, there is value in investing in a longer term effort to try to leverage what we already have to improve what we're doing. And it works for us, internally, it works for the balance sheet, and it works for our customers. I was called in to help figure out a way to stop things from going off the rails. I mean, you can't do that with everything suddenly, but there were certain themes that seemed to be emerging, anecdotally from folks with projects that were probably, were probably not coincidences. And in order to take a look at a portfolio of work, in this case, it's a bunch of projects doing for customers, professional services kind of situation. In order to do that and figure out what's going on common across those projects and what's working well and what's not, like, you're employing knowledge management tactics and techniques. You need to, assess, interview, take a look at, a representative sample of those projects. So figuring out which ones to look at to help you, get the right kind of information. You don't want to look at something that's an outlier. Taking the time to not just look at material. You can't, point AI at it and, like, here's all the stuff that this project has, and like figure out what the answer is, because most of the real details and, the story behind what, was produced is going to be in people's heads. Mm-hmm. So interviewing, talking to folks, and figuring out, like, what went wrong with this project? What were the implications because it went wrong? Like, was it corrected or was it never corrected? And how is it corrected? And how could it have been avoided? And figuring out what those signs were to either detect earlier whether that same kind of problem was going to happen on that same kind of project in the future, or what do we build in proactively to, avert something like that happening, or build in proactively that if something does happen, we have a way to not, scramble and, try to rebuild try to reinvent the wheel about how to correct it. Ended up, kind of trying to figure out what are those thematic things that were happening, and addressing those themes by socializing with, once everything was, analyzed and, kind of presented back as, these were the findings. Again, not just, shelving that knowledge off somewhere and expecting someone to consume it and get it. You have to socialize that, make it flow. So we talked about uncovering hidden risk in those projects, because it costs the company money to fix problems that they didn't anticipate, especially if it's, our fault. Then it's on us, and we have that non-billable time that people are incented to not, spend, and your profit on that project goes down. So that was like the incentive for executives to say, yes, spend time on this, like, we're going to lose less money. But there's also, non-monetary benefit where people who are working on those kind of projects, project manager especially, but also people who are developing technology or trying to work with customers, the customers are frustrated. People working on those projects are frustrated. They don't really get to, hold up a great example of, hey, this was a great thing that I was involved in. And, I'm really proud of the work that we did. Like, I'm not really proud of the work that we did because, it didn't go well. And, no one was helping, prevent it from going off the rails. So doing that storytelling. I started to coin these things as watermelon projects because everyone was saying that everything's green, everything's good, KPIs, like it's across the board. But if you peel it back, it's really red right underneath. And you figure out what are the signs that this thing is probably going to turn this way, or what are the signs that it already is, and arm people with that information so that we stop making those mistakes. And if people are doing things that are going well, that avoid those, getting people to adopt those too. I think that's a real difference. It wasn't, a small change really, because it took a little bit of effort to kind of gather those themes initially. But once you do that, you can then take a quicker look at more than one project and, kind of rapidly assess, like, this is project type that we've seen before. These are kind of the criteria that we want to take a look at. And, what, these couple of things are looking kind of off. And we want to correct that before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was just thinking about it from a project management standpoint. Having a lessons learned sort of call or review at the end of the project is interesting. And then being able to see sort of the overall sentiment or KPIs from the people involved in the project, trying to get a sense of, you mentioned that it as like a non-monetary value, but I actually saw it as a monetary value because if you look at it from an employee retention standpoint, so the people who are undergoing, successful projects or feeling like they're making an impact versus those who feel like they're spinning their wheels and getting frustrated, like for them to leave the organization, the turnover, the costs associated with it are very obvious, and
absolutely
something there, right? So I think, like, even if you're initially thinking of it as possibly like a non-monetary or non-obvious benefit, you're still seeing that in the downstream. We were going to talk a little bit about measuring impact of the knowledge management of the work. I'm wondering, like, we already kind of spoke to it a little bit. I'm wondering if there's anything else maybe that you would think to maybe add to that you want to make sure that we get in there before we kind of move on.
It is really tough. It's not like you can say, we're going to run a promotion and, because this promotion, people clicked on this thing and, we sold, 27% more widgets than we did last quarter. And, even though we gave away 5% off, like, we made, a bunch of money or something. Like, that stuff you can directly measure. It's a really big problem. And I think you can't very easily directly measure the benefit of this type of work because it's a long-term thing. You don't know when it's going to become valuable. You hope that it'll become valuable someday. And you don't know. At best, it's anecdotal. How do you tie training someone on how to navigate your intranet or ask the right question of a system, find something in a certain repository months or years ago, some kind of content that's, really, maybe old that that wasn't even there, they weren't even there when that was created, but they came in contact with it. And somehow later on that helped them right now or days or months later, that helped them with something. And, how do you track that and measure it and say, like, the effort that we spent 2 years ago looking at this project that everyone's forgotten about, like, became valuable now, and how much of an impact did it have? We don't know that. So really, often human networks are part of this chain too, and you can't track what's going on in my head and what I'm saying to you unless something's eavesdropping and maybe recording our call or that kind of thing. But you can't really do that, so it's indirect, and this is one of the biggest hurdles to justifying investment in KM. I think maintaining headcount or increasing headcount, your program, your process, your systems to those who don't get it, and I think it comes down to the advocacy is really telling those stories based on finding out that anecdotal information that, hey, you can't really easily measure this, but look at the impact that it had, and trust, like, that putting effort and money and time into this is going to yield this kind of thing, and retain your employees, or keep your customers, or that kind of thing. There's got to be other ways to describe that value that are different than a marketing campaign or something that you can track across one system or more by just clicking on stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at the cusp, I think, of that roller coaster we started with, where we will probably get to a place in the near future where that qualitative and quantitative measurement will become proactive, and it will start to, be built into your systems going forward around like how is the information being referenced, how is it being created, how is it saving time as far as like, random outreach that's coming to these subject matter experts as opposed to self-serve. So it'll be kind of curious. Like it's going to start turning more and more into a concert, I'm hoping, where we'll start to see all these things stick together. But
yeah, I was asked a little bit a little while ago when folks were piloting some of this AI stuff, and some survey went out on this trying to find out like how much time did you save by using
sure.
Whatever it was Copilot or something. Like I don't even know how to say that, like, because it's an estimate in my head. Like I didn't do it. I'm describing a negative. I don't know how long it would have taken me.
Right.
But take my word for it, and kind of take a number. But then they took all of people's stories about that number they made up and added them up together, and then made like another number that was the sum of that, saying our company saved something thousand hours. Like, did it really? I don't know how to prove that. So there's something behind the numbers that you want, some kind of story you want to tell that can still justify investment in this kind of stuff. But it's not just something you can throw up on a dashboard.
Yeah, it's definitely early days from a qualitative standpoint, and I completely understand the example you gave. But I mean, it's funny to think, Google's really bad at this of showing the actual results of the work that goes into the content you create. Most people don't know that there's a way to see like how many people are accessing a file, for instance, in Google.
Yeah.
Because they're just bad at showing it. And so I'd be curious to see like what'll happen if they start doing analytics as far as Gemini is concerned for business operations, right? Or, obviously all the other tools and all the other systems that are going to come out of the next year or so that we're looking at. So, but yeah, it'll be an interesting one. I guess as we move over from sort of the concept of that measurement side of things, I'm wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit more tangibly to like the idea of like common mistakes that you're seeing companies make when it comes to knowledge management. That's maybe more of an easier thing to address right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think going back to some of the ideas of mentioning before, if you decide to invest in this, concentrating those efforts or funding it only around, one project, or, setting up a team over there to do it, and not integrating it into everything else. I mean, you can't do that in one big bang. And yes, I fully endorse, trying one project and, telling a story about how it helped, but then doing something with that. Like, let's now do that in 10 different places, because we know that it worked in one place. And, spreading that enthusiasm, or, opening people up to the idea that, hey, you might spend some of this extra time that hopefully is not going to be extra in the future, because it's benefiting us and you, and it's kind of the way that we're thinking. So, when it's handled that way, I mean, it's too segmented where, the money and the time and the value is concentrated in, a small area over here. And there's that delicate, kind of transition period, if possible, where to take it from something that's small and to scale it and to build it up into something that's maybe sustainable and operationalized and adopted. And so I think that's a mistake. Like, that's not just going to happen by itself. It doesn't just happen organically. And it takes building relationships across functions, getting more people than that just small team initially that's getting started, that see the value, or the people that they talk to, but spreading the word and telling the story. It's so much more, again, than just capturing and curating and, making stuff findable. It's, helping people through conversations and building trust and communications and road shows and all that kind of thing, figure out, hey, we've gathered all this stuff and we've put it into potential context for you. Let us help you encounter and digest this information to then put it into a context that you can use. And then also tell us about how that worked well or how it didn't, so that we can put it back through and continuously improve.
Yeah. It's not, and this is where that crossover with the internal comms comes in around, like the changing hearts and minds really is what is the important piece behind successfully introducing that knowledge management strategy. I'm wondering, like, from a people standpoint, is there anything sort of that stands out as like a, maybe a more weird or unexpected thing that you've learned about how people actually use or avoid these knowledge systems that you're setting up?
Yeah. And, being someone who, put often puts a lot of time into setting these up and, creating a good user experience, or, arming it with the right kind of content. Building a navigation and a taxonomy, I try to, whenever I've worked on these things, I try to satisfy both camps where, hey, I like to come in, I like to navigate, down to here and over here and like eventually find what I want. Or there's this other camp that likes to type something in the box and have it come right up, on the screen. Like I try to do both, like you need to provide for all audiences in a particular system like that.
Yep.
I think something that's been kind of weird or surprising is that it's not infrequent that there are some kinds of people that, well, there's a great number of people that actually figure out like, hey, I can type something in the box and find it myself, or now, this navigation makes sense to me. There's another group of people, a small group of people that figure out, hey, there's this person that knows how to do this. And usually it's me. They'll know where this thing is. And I get treated like a human search box. So I get a Teams message, hey, do you know where blah, 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 this thing is?
Yeah.
And of course I know right off the top of my head, like where it is because I put it there, but also like, I know how you probably could get there. They're not interested usually in, teaching you to fish. They want you to catch the fish and give it to them.
Yeah.
But if it's like one of the most common things was, where's our current rate card? We have the rates every year, they get set for different types of roles and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the most common things. If you look at the statistics, the analytics, like, on the internet, like that was one of the most, accessed documents or web pages or whatever on the internet.
Yeah.
And there's like a link right to it on the homepage. And, if you type rate card into the search box on the internet, like that's the first result that will pop up. But I would get the question, where is this? Or, help me find this thing on, like I was the internet. I was a walking internet. I don't know how to avoid that. And, it could be an opportunity. Like you start to build relationships with people that you didn't even know, that they found out that where this stuff is. And I try to teach them how to fish, or, I'll turn around eventually and ask them to, be on an initiative to clean up this area of this thing. Because maybe they're interested in helping out or paying it forward. Not always. I mean, sometimes people just want to talk to somebody and have them find it. And I think those are the folks that really will, love and adopt the AI thing, because they're actually using a conversational interface to say, hey, where is this thing? And the thing is going to respond back, hey, here it is. And they didn't have to go and find it themselves.
Yeah, totally. It's funny. I was going to ask you if you had like a standard reply for these people.
I don't do the let me Google that for you.
Yeah, right.
But, yeah.
I think it's there's an interesting quid pro quo there where it's like, where would you think to find this? Might be an interesting way of sort of responding. But anyway, so as you go to kind of rounding this all out, what we're kind of been talking about this whole time is this like single source of truth concept. Like people need to find something, right? Like they need to know that the thing that they're getting is the trustworthy answer for these questions. So I'm wondering, like, have you kind of settled on any kind of definitions around like single source of truth for you? As far as like, what does it look like to achieve it? Because it is a bit different from knowledge management. It is a bit different from content management. It is a bit different from internal comms. So just kind of wanted to get your take on that one before we maybe switch over to the next topic.
Yeah, and I both love and hate this term. I've used it myself, and I hear it as a lofty goal in a lot of different presentations or, wherever. I think sometimes it's a misnomer. A lot of times, I think what the truth that's being referred to in particular situations is data. Yes, you need to know what this number is, or you need to know what this fact or figure is, and that is a piece of data sitting somewhere. And I agree, like there shouldn't be differing versions of that, and ideally it should be in one place. But even if it was in 10 places, as long as it's the same thing, it's the truth, and you can find it in 10 different places, it's not 10 different ways in 10 different places, then you're fine, I think. But data isn't knowledge. I'm a big fan of a lot of KM luminaries. One of the ones that I go to often to describe the difference between in the evolution of data into knowledge and then something that you can get value out of is the Tim Powell pyramid. It's a pyramid shaped thing. I forget what the descriptor of it is, but like data is like down to bottom, that's not knowledge. It's just stuff that you can do something with potentially. You gain insights from data and turn it into things that you can potentially know, and then your knowledge can eventually be put into context and applied to then potentially get some value out of. There's no value in data without doing something with it, and even if you get knowledge from data, there's really no value until you are able to encounter it and put it into your own context and apply it and have it make an impact. You don't get a value until you get the impact.
Right.
So when I think about single source of truth, like I think, okay, well, there's a right answer somewhere. Yes, I think there should be a right answer to a lot of things, but sometimes the truth that you want people to find out is they have to come up with it themselves, because they're in a unique situation that no one else has ever encountered before. They're a unique person. They're on a unique team right now with a unique customer, at this time, in history. And they need to know how to determine their right answer for now, which will be their truth. And often I think that you don't, want to have only a single source to get what the how you would determine that from. I mean, you might need multiple perspectives. It doesn't mean that, like, yes, you should be able to go get the procedure for, adding a new client into Salesforce, like the way that we do it now. And, that's absolutely, there should be one procedure or process for that, and you should find it in one place. And if it gets updated, that should, be updated in that place. Absolutely, I agree with that. But you can determine your new truth for you if you're trying to make a decision by leveraging the available knowledge and applying it. Of course, there can only be one, final executive legally binding copy of that SOW that, has a file name that says, like, final 2 signed, faxed, scanned, version 7, like whatever, like figuring out which one is the real one, like that's a problem. But there's only one copy of the executed SOW, and that's a single source of truth.
Mm-hmm.
How do you meet a challenge that you're looking at right now? How do you innovate with the knowledge that's available to you, and that will help you come up with a better solution that's your truth for you right now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the modern organization needs to be a lot more deliberate in cultivating systems and information and knowledge and a sharing culture, that learning organization that gives people the ability to find the knowledge that they need to then make a determination themselves about what is going to be their truth for what they're encountering right now. I think that's a lot less likely to just accidentally fall into place these days if it's not deliberately worked on. The challenge is that often this tacit knowledge, which forms the basis for making better decisions, was usually shared experientially. If you're working on something right now with other people and you're solving a problem, or you're telling someone about a problem you solved around the water cooler, or somewhere else where you're kind of hanging out and just like talking about what you're working on.
Sure.
And these days, with a lot of the remote work and a heavy reliance on virtual collaboration and Gen AI and all that kind of thing, like you're losing some of that ability to socialize that tacit knowledge, and it's got to be done in a different way.
Mm-hmm. I think you brought up something that I think is really useful, which is this idea of like single source of truth might not apply to everything. Like it only applies to certain things. If you were to ask it from like a an SOP standpoint or a policy standpoint, or maybe like as far as records of contracts, right? Then maybe you're looking at a single source of truth. But as soon as you get into this idea of any kind of relativity or any kind of there's nuance. Okay, well. It's more like we're going to have a source for consideration rather than a single source of truth, right? So, yeah, that's great. All right, well, maybe we'll switch over to our next segment around like the technology, AI in the future. We have been having a nice conversation where we're really digging into things. So I'm kind of curious, like maybe what you think about the idea of if we could try more like rapid response answers. When we think about technology, AI in the future, first question, what's a piece of tech everyone was hyped about that just didn't deliver for you?
Oh gosh, I lived through this. Enterprise search was the thing that was going to fix all knowledge problems, and it was going to be an appliance or something you install, and it's going to crawl all your stuff, and suddenly all your employees are going to be able to find anything they need, and it's going to be on page 1 of the search results. And it didn't do that. But also, one of the great problems that I was involved in fixing with a lot of urgent phone calls and that kind of thing, people, was that it also exposed a bunch of stuff that no one knew they had access to.
Yeah.
And so that was something that definitely did not deliver and was hyped. And I'm hoping that on this hype curve that we're on with AI, that's not gonna happen. That we'll actually get some value out of it.
Yeah, I think we're like third or fourth wave enterprise search now. I lost track, but it is curious how we're still, everyone's still going after that, right? That it's the white whale for all these enterprise companies.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. How do you see AI shaping internal comms and knowledge sharing? So are we being realistic, or are we a bit delusional with all this?
I think I'm in both camps. I mean, you can use AI to craft or get ideas. And especially if your AI that you're using is, living within inside your ecosystem and has access to your organization's stuff, to kind of help it. I think that's helpful. But I think one of the interesting things to think about is, if folks are using AI to craft conversations, but also individual workers often, because they're deluged with stuff, sometimes they're using AI to filter what they should pay attention to or not, or summarize or that kind of thing. And at some point, if you look at it, as a system, it's sort of agentic because, with something artificial talking to something else artificial, because it's being generated in some way through an artificial means, and there's an artificial consumption on the other end to distill it down or summarize it for a person, and that's kind of troubling to me.
Yeah, I was joking with friends recently about the idea that we're going to soon have email readers that'll be agents. And so it'll just be like someone will create with an agent on one side, send it over to your agent, and they'll just start firing back and forth with each other almost.
Yes.
Do you think tools can fix culture, or is that just a convenient excuse?
I'll quickly say absolutely not. I'm a firm believer that you need to look at all three legs of the stool, like I like to say, and I think I said them earlier on too, people, process, and tools. Your culture is curated. It's an accident if you don't curate it. But I think your tools need to follow the needs of your organization and support it. They should be aligned with your culture. If you have a democratized tool, but you don't have a culture of people owning co-owning things, then that doesn't work in your culture. It doesn't create your culture. And I also think that as far as technology, some folks will say, in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. I think that's one of the most false promises of technology. They will not. You have to respond to needs, people that they asked for, and align it to what they're doing. And again, pay attention to people and process alongside what you're doing with your tools.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes doing implementations of intranets for clients is bringing up the old Field of Dreams for everybody. Yeah, it's definitely a change management adoption strategy kind of thing, is pretty much make or break for those kinds of tools and systems, right? So what makes a tool actually usable inside an organization? What do vendors always seem to miss from your perspective?
I hope this is changing, but I think still one of the biggest problems that I see with tools is that you have to go somewhere to use it. And usually that somewhere is outside of where you're working. I think tools have to fit into where your work happens and the way that you work. It's got to be in context. If there's a little pane over here on the side of your email, if you're doing something related to your email, that's where it's got to be. I'm not going to jump out to something else. I'm far less likely to jump out to something else to do something that's related to my email, and then jump back in. You lose so many users that way. So I think where work happens, the times where you expected people to navigate somewhere, in a browser and spend time that way, those are starting to go away. We kind of talked about, I think at one point a little earlier on as well, I'm going to probably type something into a, AI assisted, work, companion, and it's probably going to go out and pull something from something that's, on a browser or what have you. But the days where I'm going to actually type in or, load up the internet page or, go to try and find something myself, are, I think, coming to an end. And so, putting tools where you're working, whether that's in, your Teams or Slack or, Outlook, or, if you're designing, CAD files, then you're putting something in that thing that you're designing CAD files on, whatever it may be. You go to your doctor and they're in the, the patient system, and, if they had to jump out to something else, they already, hate typing stuff into this, it's not going to work. So where people are working, who are you trying to get to use this thing? You've got to integrate it into what they're already using, where they're doing their work.
Mm-hmm.
That was a long answer than a short one.
Yeah, it made me think about too, like how the interface is going to start changing, not only from like the sort of like the chatbot experience, but also I think from like even the screens that we're using, and like the availability of sort of attention, I guess. Because I was just looking at, you know, the new AI, the new model that they're putting out from Google for the glasses, for instance, like you and I are both glass wearers. It's like, I'm just curious, like even if that'll start to shift pretty soon here in the near future, where you'll just always kind of have that HUD almost going on all the time, right? So we'll see. I think there's an interesting piece around dashboards that they sort of require a bit of customization, but they're never built for it. So it's like the idea the leader will always look at it and have something to say of like, I wish it did this, or I want that, right? And every leader is going to have their own piece. And so I think like the dashboards that will succeed in the future will have that sort of adaptability, but also give you the opportunity to sort of ensure alignment across leadership. So it's sort of like, you all need to see this, but if you need to, you can kind of make your own decisions and take it in your own direction, like we were kind of talking about before, the single source of truth. So
I hope so. And I'll tack something onto that as well and relate it back to AI too. You know, depending on who the audience is that's looking at that, they've got to trust what that thing's, because it's an aggregation of data and rendering some kind of opinion on it or helping you make an opinion. And if you don't know the data is accurate, if you don't have trust that that's, you know, where it's coming from and what it actually means, or if you need to know why is this recommendation being made, or why is this thing, you know, that's usually pointing over this way, is pointing over this way, but why?
Yeah.
One phrase that I've heard a lot over the past few years now is, oh, I want to double click into that.
Yeah.
It's fine. But maybe you actually do need to. And I've seen this with AI as well. You get AI to tell you a recommendation or a course of action, or, you know, like what it thinks is the truth. And in order to accept it, depending on who you are, I dealt with this frequently with physicians that I was working with. You know, there was a decision that was, you know, rendered like this person should, you know, stay in the hospital for one more day or not, something like that. And physicians were willing to, you know, accept that a system told them this kind of information, this piece of information, but they would only do it if the system also told them how it got to that determination.
Yeah. Right.
Why am I telling you this? Mm-hmm. And if you provide that alongside some of the data, it can actually get people to then, you know, use that data, depending on who they are, and think about who your audience is. But I think that's you know, really important in these dashboard situations as well, or what's being spit out of these AI systems. It's not just what the answer is, but how did you determine this answer, and do I trust it, or am I, you know, going to make my own decision from it?
Probably in the next model, right? So
I hope so.
Yeah. All right. What's something you wish more execs understood about the employee experience? So you spoke to this a few times already today around like the idea of being able to understand what's going on at the individual contributor level. Wanted to kind of think more about that.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of goes back to the idea of trying to prove the result of some kind of investment of time or money or both, that it had some kind of impact or result, so that you continue to spend that money or, you know, fund those headcount or, you know, put that time towards it. And I think often that the best results of investing are sometimes the least directly provable. You know, you can't draw a straight line all the time between proactive investment and a someday more better X fill in the blank. And especially in KM, or, you know, putting efforts into really running initiatives with communications and change strategies and that kind of thing the right way. There's all sorts of stuff in the middle that muddles the ability for you to draw a straight line from, I put, you know, $100,000 into this line on this spreadsheet and I got something else out of it that was improved. You know, can I really directly relate those things? I don't know. So you've got to be telling, you know, different kinds of stories there to help make that connection, but it's a real squiggly, you know, line with some, you know, kind of dotted lines around there and some kind of assumptions. But if you have the right people and the right processes around it, with some tooling, you can get there, I think. And, you know, I think I wish more executives understood that, you know, everything doesn't just, you know, work out nicely on spreadsheet, that if you tweak something over here lights up. There's a lot of stuff in the middle there, and I don't think they don't get that, but it doesn't work very well in a board meeting or at the end of the quarter when you're trying to make your spreadsheet work. So, you know, drawing that direct line would be a lot. It would be great if it was easier to do, but I don't think that you can do that. As far as, you know, your employee experience overall and kind of curating that culture, one of the things that I've continued to try to help my teams that I work with and the leadership that is there to support them understand is there has to be a continual mutual investment. We're not just asking, you shouldn't be just asking your employees to contribute to the organization and to give, what they have. You've got to reinvest in them. And there's got to be a value proposition there where they're, getting more skills, improving their career, their experience is positive, but also interesting. And, hopefully, entices them to stay and to continue to invest in your organization, that mutual kind of thing. But you've also got to be okay with, if we, have invested in this person and they've given us, that they take some of that investment and they move on. It's okay. There's good attrition and bad attrition, and some attrition is good. And if you have maintained that mutual value proposition enough so that even if someone decides to step away voluntarily, they're going to carry that story around with them, and that reputation will live as a positive one to other folks, and it may eventually come back in someone else that they refer, or at least speak positively about your organization, so that someone else comes in and that's your recoup of investment. And that's really a non-direct line.
Yeah, well, it's interesting again. I think I mentioned it earlier, but organizations, some of the bigger ones, especially like major consulting firms and stuff like that, they have personal or professional research and development PRDs that are sort of baked into the way that they do work, and even how their agents or consultants are assigned. So I think that those things are all related based on what you just mentioned, right? Like the idea that there's the exchange of tacit knowledge or the capturing of tacit knowledge is part of like an overall development, and it's a mutual investment from both sides. So I think that when you're trying to explain that squiggly story that you mentioned before, it's not necessarily just within the context of the knowledge management side, but it's also in this broader context of professional research and development that we've seen as an important piece to successful organizations, right? So I'm sure there's white papers out there that can help, back up.
Yeah, and I will say one good sign, I think, of an organization, if you're looking to join one, or kind of checking them out, if they have a healthy alumni network, it means they actually care about people who have departed and they maintain those relationships. It's advantageous for them in a business sense, but also, that's kind of a good clue that they care about some of the stuff.
Yeah, mentorship programs, stuff like that, all good hallmarks for sure. Let's go to our kind of closing statements here. And I wanted to ask you, from your point of view, like what's one principle or philosophy you try to live by in your work?
It probably aligns with kind of, I'm a people person. So as interested as I am in technology, I'm trying to, help people use technology or, find technology that will help people in what they're doing. And so I really value all the different perspectives that I get from different people. I mean, everyone, no one's just like me. And you can gain something from being exposed to or talking with or, understanding how other people approach these problems or think about these kinds of things, and deliver better technology because of that. But also when you need to work with folks or, entice them to work with you on something that's, you're passionate about, maybe it's building up a KM program or that kind of thing, building those relationships, really, I think is what I thrive on, and also it helps me be successful at what I'm working on. So I try to keep in mind, and I've heard this from somewhere else before, but I kind of adopted it, that people might forget what you've actually done, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And so in all those interactions, like, trying to figure out, what are we working on, and, what are we trying to do together, but doing it in a way that is a positive experience that, honors that different people have different perspectives, and that's actually valuable, is really important to me.
All right, and then finally, if for our last question, it's a little bit of a cheeky one, but if your career had a tagline, what would it be? How would you kind of describe what you've experienced so far?
Oh gosh, sometimes I have joked that my middle name is Process. I get excited about figuring out kind of how to string these things together, and what's efficient, and what works well and what doesn't work well, and trying to replicate that so that you can do something better more often, and scale it. But whatever it is, like, I really try to get people to focus on the why. I really want to figure out what is that thing you're trying to communicate? What are you trying to memorialize as that piece of knowledge? Or, what do you need with those perspectives and relationships that we were just talking about, matching up people and what they need with tools and what they can provide, and trying to solve that why problem so that they can be helped by this technology. That's what I really try to do. And if you get to the end of something that you've worked on and it just, looks pretty, or you're just kind of just sitting over there, you didn't really solve the why problem. And that's what I try to do. I try to be a translator, and make sure that we all end up with something of value, and that there's an outcome that came out of this, and that all has to do with the why.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the conversation today, Jonathan. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this episode of Unmuted. If you liked what you heard, please rate, review, and follow the show, and maybe share it with someone who's been meaning to clean up the knowledge base someday, because good knowledge, as we found, doesn't manage itself. Thanks, everybody. Looking forward to having you on our next episode.